And then,
Is it alive?
yeah, it's alive right now. Okay. Yeah, you can just do it from over there or whatever. So I don't want to get too much into like what I feel in the past, like the hurt part you're talking about. Like God did show me my whole life twice, and I did see how I was born stuck into another room with a silicone nipple and given a security blanket. And, you know, basically no hugs. I don't remember ever being hugged like when I was a kid. And also the aggressive and distant father, the divorce, the whole thing that happened that caused so much hurt that you start to retreat into yourself looking for, like I remember when I first discovered in like grade 8, these marvelous creatures called women that were so beautiful and so attractive and got lots of attention. They were so lovable, you know. And I never ever experienced same-sex attraction. But somehow that seemed a way, like identifying with women, it seemed a way to find love. And I know that at the center of the whole transgender issue is the lack of love. Like if somebody understood a person at a certain time in their life and really welcomed them. I just heard a story from a little church in Georgia where some man came in a dress and high heels and basically to kind of try to disturb the congregation, but they all loved him so much that he ended up getting converted, you know. And so there's plenty of stories like that. So I wanted to sing this little song. This is just a couple verses of something from back in the 90s. Because I fell in love with Jesus, and then obviously he was bent to redeem me. And any feelings I had inside that were gentle or trying to hit a high note or anything like that, I just would censor because it was associated with possibly femininity, which terrified me because, you know, I'm a man, right? So how he sorted it out, I'll share with you after this in a second. Since before time we were meant to be together in your sacred heart of love. You are my rock, Lord, my heart seeks thee. You're my beginning, you're my end. I hear you calling, yes, I hear you calling me. Sacred heart of love, you're a sacred heart of love. I hear you calling. Love is a fire, sweet Lord, take us higher. Love is living water. Lord, give us living water, welling up inside to life. I hear you calling. Okay, so what I've learned, and I guess it's about time I passed around my credentials. My dear fiance would pass that picture around.
The picture?
Yeah, the picture shows what I looked like 2 years ago.
I don't have it here.
It's on the seat.
On the seat? No?
Is it this one? Is it this one?
Oh, okay.
It's a bunch of notes and it has a
Oh,
picture.
yes. It has a picture. Oh, here it is.
Yeah, so it shows you what the wonders of science can do without, while they wreck your soul. Anyways,
Start from over there and then you pass around all that.
sure. So anyways, what happened was, without going into details about my past, I had this inclination that I mentioned to you, and I gave it up in 1989 and started going to daily mass. And it was like a good solid 25 years of being tempted daily, in ways that sometimes I would be just walking around going, no, that you'll go to hell for that. This is constant temptation. And all of a sudden, the Lord said to me, I spent 4 years in a cabin by myself, reading the Song of Songs, and I was into all the women mystics and St. John of the Cross, and getting deep into Catholic mysticism, and how the soul is the bride of Christ, and how the Song of Songs can be interpreted at 4 different levels. That it can be the individual soul in relation to Christ. And so basically the way that I decided that I was going to sublimate this haunting inclination that was being used against me was that I would go to Christ as bride. And that worked for many, many years. I spent years, hours in front of the Blessed Sacrament. I had keys to the church in several churches because I did work there. So I had unlimited access, God granted me, to the Blessed Sacrament. And I was completely in love with Jesus. I mean, just totally in love with Jesus. And I guess you could call it like a honeymoon phase where you're constantly being consoled, But from reading the saints that that's going to end and that you're going to have to suffer. But I thought, well, if I love him enough, I won't mind the suffering. And I remember in the 90s praying, I became a Franciscan in 1990, so I got 30 years in that. And this prayer of St. Francis where he says, Lord, please allow me to experience as much as possible in this life the suffering that drove you to the cross for us. And also please allow me to experience as much as this life as possible the love that drove you to the cross for us. And I remember praying that, and around the same time praying things like, Lord, never listen to me when I pray. Because all I want is your will, and how can I decide more or less than your will? Kind of thing. The spirituality deepened into this divine romance. It's the only way I can explain it. And I read all the books like The Way of Divine Love, like Sister Josepha, St. Margaret Mary, and like St. Julian of Norwich, and it goes on, and I just so in love with Jesus because he was accepting this inner self that was a totality of who I was, and yet I was still having problems expressing any gentle side of my soul because of toxic masculinity that I'd picked up from so many areas. And but with Jesus, it was like love. I mean, he was bridegroom and I was bride, and I knew that the saints had the same experience, and they even took female names like Saint Jean-Marie de Vianney or Saint Louis de Marie de Montfort, that they were acknowledging this bride soul. And at the same time, I was going to a lot of conferences. I had a radio show called Immaculate Heart Radio for about 13 and a half years. And I go to a lot of conferences, partly to raise money, partly to take part in a conference. And a lot of men would express to me that they couldn't love Jesus the way I love Jesus if we got talking about how I love Jesus. they'd say, no, that makes me feel gay, you know. And so you could see like the influence of the culture coming in and making these men feel like they were losing their manhood if they loved Jesus, which is like huge. That's like really huge. So what happened was, in these 4 years of solitude, was I was reading the Song of Songs just in depth, like just soaking in it, and going to daily mass. I've been going to daily mass since like 1990, and loving Jesus in the Eucharist, and slowly starting to realize that just loving Jesus in the Eucharist, in the tabernacle, that's not enough. Like, you have to love your neighbor. That's how you tell how much you're loving God, is you got to love your neighbor. So that means you should have a mission. And so I started praying after hearing Michael Kelly, or what's the guy from Matthew Kelly from Australia. Yeah, he'd be going like, you got to become the best version of yourself, you know, and sit in the classroom with silence, you know. And so it started to dawn on me that I should ask the Lord, what's the best version of myself? And as I did that for a year or so, all of a sudden it began to dawn on me, he wanted me. Now, I had spiritual director at the time too, who agreed with this, very holy priest, and that I should turn myself inside out and show the world that every soul in the Catholic Church is a bride of Christ, including men. Now, I didn't know at that time there was a bit of a flaw in that theology, you know, because it's collectively we're the bride of Christ, but this was like an individual experience between me and Christ. And so I talked to my spiritual director about it. He thought it was a good idea. He brought me to the diocesan theologian. He thought it was fundamental. He said, yeah, you have to do this, right? And so I entered into, I saw an article where it was Dr. Tamara Gardner, who's a pioneer in this false project of saying that women can be men and men can be women. I mean, I had enough knowledge to know that, even from reading Catholic Insight, if you remember that magazine, you know, they said, well, it's not really a woman, it's a castrated, feminized male, which is essentially about as true as you can say. And, but all that aside, because I felt this call from God to do it, and I thought of that prophet where he asked them, go put on some muddy loincloth that's laying by the river, dig under the walls of Jerusalem, marry a prostitute, and that's a message to Israel at that time, right? So I'm thinking, well, if God asks people to do weird things, maybe he's asked me to do something, right? So next thing you know, I'm with this pioneering psychologist, another pioneering psychologist at the Foothills Gender Clinic, Dr. Joe Raish. And I'm entering into this like garden of roses, this rosy path down to destruction without really realizing, you know, I was doing it for God, and I had all this backing with the obedience and everything, because I really believe in obedience. And I got involved in that, and basically after 5 years of HRT, and there was one minor surgery that almost killed me, because there was so much malpractice going on that they didn't give me an antibiotic run after this surgery. They didn't do anything. In 2 weeks I was septic, and I remember I almost didn't make it to the hospital. I thought I was going to die on Glenmore Trail in rush hour. I could see the hospital. I'm like trying to get there. I feel my life pouring out, and I thought, well, this is really good. As a Calgarian, long term, like dying in a rush hour on Glenmore, trying to get to the Rocky View, right? But I did get there. They threw me in a wheelchair right away, and at that time, the pronouns, you know, they said, well, she's septic. And I went, yeah, I'm septic, but I wish I was tanked, you know, because I was delirious. So they put every antibiotic known to man in me, and I didn't die. And, but that was only part of it. I mean, they gave me contraindicated medications. They gave me medications that you can't go off suddenly, and all of a sudden the prescription would disappear, you know? And at that time, like way back at Afata House, I don't know if any of you remember that place up by Edmonton in the Glory Hills. Now it's run by the Carmelites. It was Father Ray was my spiritual director at that time. I've had a series of spiritual directors since 1990. First was Bishop Cooney, you know, and up to the latest one is Father Dave Meadows. And he encouraged me to come and do this talk because he said it's a message of hope, you know. And I don't want to be afraid of like losing my reputation or something and then holding back something that glorifies God. That would just be wrong. And so that's why I talked to LifeSite News for 2 hours, but after 2 hours of talking to me, they didn't want to do the video because I hadn't kind of shrunk it yet. And so I'll try to shrink it tonight, so that don't keep you here too long. But essentially the message that I'm trying to get across is that anybody who's experiencing this, like I already had a couple experiences, at least one direct with a friend's daughter who wanted to be a boy. I talked to her for like 10 minutes and she was overjoyed. She felt the doctors were pushing her. She wasn't ready, and once I told her how much she was loved, and I just said whatever the Holy Spirit said to give me, she just decided not to do it. So that was one success there. And even when I was going through this transformation, and I asked the Lord, well, what would my name be? And it came in my head, Adriana. And I thought, no. You know, that's a diminutive of a male name, you know. How about like Sophia or Ursula or something, you know? No, but that didn't work. I wanted to be Adriana. So I looked up the meaning of Adriana, and it meant dark but lovely, which is right out of the, you know, one who's cared for their own, not cared for their own vineyard, which was certainly true about me. I wasn't taking care of myself. And so there were, in the beginning of this, like I remember talking to my spiritual director, Tim Hortons, and he goes, yeah, I think it'd be okay if you took estrogen as long as you weren't going for a man. And okay, so then he goes, well, let's go shopping. So we end up at Value Village, and he almost gets busted by his parishioners in the women's section, you know. But anyways, this was all joy at that time, you know. It was like, okay, God's going to, because I remember God saying to me, I can redeem this. And then I remember doing like a good year of research, what the Catholic Church taught about it. Like, I wasn't going to do something that was intrinsically disordered. And nowhere did it say it was intrinsically disordered. There was only one statement from Pope Benedict who said the transgender mentality is diabolical because it's going after kids, you know, when they're confused. But that seemed to exclude me. And even when I was really, really young and dealing with this inclination, I basically was reading the Bible a lot too. And I used to keep it under my pillow because I used to get attacked a lot. And, you know, about it's an abomination if a man wears a woman's clothes or if a woman wears a man's clothes. See, the problem with that is it's like you can say, okay, that's time specific. It was for them, Israel, selected by God, the Canaanites and all these countries all around them were doing perverse things, and he was trying to protect them. But that doesn't apply to me. And besides, look at all the women wearing suits, right? So, you know. So, I mean, you can see the kind of, I even did 2 lectures. I mean, when I talked to my son about it, that was interesting because I got invited to two sociology lectures at Mount Royal College, like to talk about the problems with the language. Because in my mind at that time, it was becoming the best version of yourself. I left it up to God. What is the best version of me? And he's telling me it's Adriana, you know. So at these lectures, I focused on the problems with the language. Trans, that means you're going to something different. I said, no, it's becoming. You're becoming your true self, right? But it was later that I realized just how insidious that lie was, right? because I had it all figured out from reading genetics and everything, that every zygote is female at first, and then there's a differentiation that happens at a certain 5 weeks or something, and if the mother's under stress, which most mothers are when they're pregnant, that differentiation could go wrong. There could be hormones. The male zygote could be, flooded with female hormones at that point. There's all these things. And then there was the other part of my flawed theology was about God's permissive will versus his direct will. So take a Down syndrome child, which I have some very good friends who pushed for one more child, and they ended up with this beautiful angel. And see, God willed that baby to be a perfect baby, but that baby came into this flawed creation. And so I remember my mother, just before she passed, we reconciled. She'd say to me, "But you were my little boy." And I go, that was just a handicap that God gave me to overcome, So here was my mindset, was that, even my spiritual director called me a pioneer and everything like that. And I never felt comfortable being called a mystic. And Father Bob out at the Mount, he says, "Well, that's because you're honest." Yeah. Anyways.
So how did you start? Because there's this childhood stuff. Then there's the bad theology, all kind of mixed up theology, and then this expressing. And so, how long did you live as a woman?
5 years.
5 years.
Yeah, and then that picture shows you. I was even a member of the CWL. I was doing arts and environment, One time my friend in Kelowna, who used to run the Catholic bookstore, Paul, he went to a meeting about getting the Latin Mass in Kelowna, and all they talked about all night was me. What right does he have, I can see the danger now. I've been 2 years detransitioning. One of the messages they gave me strongly in the medical was it's irreversible. You're stuck with it. And when I figured out I wasn't stuck with it, it was actually March 19th, about 2 years ago. Sacred Heart Parish, we consecrated ourselves to St. Joseph on Mass, like all of us, during the Mass. And then afterwards, I'm talking to St. Joseph. That day, for the first time in a long time, I spent 3 hours in front of the Blessed Sacrament. And I knew I was in trouble. I mean, things were falling apart. And so, he's saying to me, "You got grandchildren. You got to go back to being dad and granddad." It's as simple as that, because otherwise you got a millstone around your neck, right? And I remember thinking at the time, "Well, Lord, I'm pretty messed up, but not as bad as that guy in the tombs." Or how about Lazarus,
So what's unusual about your story is that, most people going through this are going through
for sexual reasons.
Well, and outside of a religious context.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? And so what I'm upset, I guess, when I hear your story, is that the church didn't reflect the truth to you.
Until the Legionaries came along.
Yeah.
Because the Legionaries, I went in there as Adriana and I threw down my 2 albums, Scott Kelly. I just said, I submit to the judgment of the church. But then I was given various jobs, like taking care of the flowers and arts and environment, and I was hanging out with the ladies and, spraying the pews until they were warped. It was deep COVID at that time. And I saw how the church was literally adrift, submitting to government. But I thought of Jesus before Pilate. You would not have this power over me unless it's given from above. And I knew the church was going to be raised up, and I continued working with the poor. Never caught COVID, but I was always out there trying to kiss the leper. And they'd figure it out. I mean, there was one time when I met this guy just walking out by the river, and he's telling me, "I'm an assassin," and I go, "Oh yeah, big deal." And he's like, I'm trying to give him a meal, and a shower, because I was bringing all these people into my apartment. That got me in trouble too. But I was just completely fearless. That was one of the good fruits that came out of it. Once I had been marginalized and I experienced a lot of what women have experienced, like for 5,000 years, and I experienced a lot of what it means to be marginalized, like the poorest of the poor, the lowest of the low. Because what's lower than a man renouncing his masculinity, like in a man's eyes, like they already perhaps look down on women, and here's a man who wants to renounce his sacred masculinity, that's low, and so basically, like for me, it was a journey of trying to get closer to God, and there was elements of, if I could just be beautiful, God would love me, because it was like I was having a hard time accepting God's love after a lifetime of rejection, So there's a whole psychological thing here that I could write about, but I wouldn't want to inflict it on you now.
But you didn't get help from the church until later.
No, it wasn't until Father Daniel and Father John Gannon and other priests who were there, and they saved my soul, really, and people praying for me too, because it was 2 years ago on Holy Thursday. I went in to see Father Dan in the confessional, and I wasn't really going to confession. I just said to him, I think my theology's a little off, and he goes, yep. And I go, well, then what do I do? I don't even have any men's clothes anymore, And he says, oh, go to Walmart, or no, go to Value Village. But the funny thing was, all winter there was a pile of clothes in the corner by the outside door that I was actually taking care of the grounds and everything. But for some reason, I could never pick up those clothes, But I went out after that little encounter with Father Daniel, and I picked up these clothes and realized they were men's clothes, like my size. And I went right over the laundromat, washed them up, went home, changed, come back just in time for the seminar on family values and everything, right? And I walk into church, and everybody who sees me, every one of them, they just light up. They just light up. So I knew I was going in the right direction. And actually, Brother Andrew there, he said to me, your journey is edifying, he said. Now you have a way of being a saint. And so, of course, I start dreaming about, okay, I could be the patron saint of transgenders, at least repentant ones, right? But I mean, the power of the Eucharist and the power of confession and the power of wanting the truth and the power of God's faithfulness. I went through a period where I was totally just taking buses to see my grandchildren. They were in Kelowna. I was super fit because I was listening to St. Paul when he says I put my body under discipline. I was going 10 miles a day. I'd walk to the church 7 kilometers away with the rosary in my hand. The trucks going by wouldn't even bother me. And I was praying over people at the bus stops because Father Kenneth, one of the legionaries, said I was on a mission. And I even had the devil speak to me through really disordered people, which is always a sign you're doing something right. He's calling me a bitch, But the bottom line is, it didn't take me long. It's been 2 years and about 2-3 months. And it was actually last year, the Feast of Corpus Christi, that I really knew that I was coming out of everything. Because I fell into a depression after the shot. That was the other weird thing. When I got that jab, I just descended into hell. It says that Jesus descended into hell. Well, I guess his bride has to too, But wow, difficult depression for about 6 months. He taught me, the Heavenly Father admonished me. I'm hanging on to that scripture. It's not punishment, it's admonishment. God admonishes the Son whom he loves. Because he turned his face away from me, and I experienced just natural sunlight without the light of God. I don't wish that on anybody. Like, in your light we see light. And that's why I told you that time I was always looking in the sky looking for God's light to come back. But what I learned in that period, just briefly, I saw hell. I mean, just like I just finished a painting of Our Lady of Fatima and the ground opening up, because it turns out they hired Dali to do that. And I thought, well, why don't I do that? Oh, I don't have a canvas. And then the next day I get this text, we just left a canvas for you outside by the car. You know, it's been miracle after miracle after miracle since St. Joseph told me to get out of it. And I've been really relying on him, and especially about being a better father, being a man, being a husband. What God did for me in that period of time, besides teaching me that you can receive the Eucharist and it'll bring you death instead of life. Like, I didn't realize that. Like,
Well, Scott, I'm going to draw you to close, because
Yeah.
there's some more material I want to cover.
Sure.
But I want to thank you for your courage to tell people your story, and it is a story of hope. You know, God is a redeemer, and nobody is beyond redemption.
well,
And I think it's easy for people to, like I said, look at these different issues without a person, and then, you know, when we see the person, you know that there's a soul, and every soul is redeemable. And so, you know, so that's something we want to remember. So thank you.
if you permit me, I would say just one more thing quick,
Sure.
and then one verse of the song to end it. I finally saw, like, the demon that had kept me prisoner for 50 years, and God delivered me in the most powerful way. And I saw what's affecting society nowadays. It's a two-necked, two-faced demon called narcissism in the selfie society, and also the various erotic ones, you know. But I'm delivered. I'm living a life now that's nothing like before. Like, I'm completely a man. Like, completely. There's nothing, no shade over that or any doubt or anything in there. And I'm also a survivor, obviously, because there was a time when I filled the bathtub with warm water and went in there with a knife in my hand. You know, and I didn't do it because I thought, this is nuts. This can't be true. You know, all this darkness. All I ever wanted to do is good. So I just decided to do good no matter what. And so that's where I am today. It's like delivered, happy, I'm engaged. I mean, this is a story, like, that people need to hear, because anybody who's repentant, God will welcome them. But if they persist in this, they're offending His divine majesty. That's what was really impressed on me, because God made things a certain way. And so if dogs try to be cats and cats try to be dogs, you can't even tell kids the birds and the bees anymore, because there's the birds and the bees, and then the birds who want to be bees, and the bees who want to be birds, and you know, it's all nuts, right? But I know from experience now that it's not a way that anyone who truly wants to love God and be a Catholic or anything could actually go. Like, I know that. So this is just the end of the song, what came years later. King of kings and Lord of lords, you are the author of life. There is no God like you on earth or in the sky. El Shaddai. before time, we were meant to be together in your sacred heart.